Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Graff, and I'm the editor-in-chief of National Jeweler. I'm pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of My Next Question, National Jeweler and Jewelers of America's co-branded webinar series. Today, National Jeweler's 4 editors are hosting our annual post-Vegas wrap-up webinar episode. Today, I'm joined by Ashley Davis, Senior Editor Fashion, Associate Editor News, Lenore Fido, and our newest editor, Lauren McLemore, an associate editor who will be covering the colored gemstone market for us. Before we get the webinar started, I just want to remind all our attendees today that if they have a question, they can type it into the Q&A screen at the bottom of their screens. I'll be back on at the end of this discussion to share the questions. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be available on nationaljeweler.com and the Jewelers of America websites this coming Friday, June 16th. Now I'll get the discussion started, and as mentioned, I'll be back on to field any questions at the end. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, here we are again. It's hard to believe, but it's been another year, and we're back again to talk about the Las Vegas shows. And as I mentioned, we have a new team member with us, Lauren. Welcome, Lauren. Yay.
Welcome.
Lauren is, as I mentioned, going to be covering the colored gemstone market for us. And so she's going to give updates from that on the webinar today and talk a little bit about her experience as a first-time editor at the show. But I'm going to start first to talk a little bit about trends and topics of interest at the show, things that you saw in terms of jewelry design or topics that you felt like were trending in terms of the education session or just conversations on the show floor. And Ashley, you spend a lot of time at Couture every year, so I'm going to start with you. What were some of the trends you saw at Couture this year?
Yeah, so I had done a really big trend report for our State of the Majors issue, which came out right before the shows. So I had taken some time close to the shows to really look into what I feel like are the biggest trends lately. And a lot of that really rang true for me in Vegas. So one trend in particular is color, and that manifests in several different ways, a lot through inlay, and a lot through what I'm calling the cocktail jewel. So as opposed to just a traditional cocktail ring, any kind of jewel, whether it's like a big drop earring or like a cocktail pendant with like a big juicy gemstone. And something that I've noticed compared to the beginning of my career is that designers seem to be after more unique and interesting gemstones. So it's, if anything, it's like I'm seeing less rubies, less emeralds lately. It's like about like interesting colored tourmalines or different varieties of opal, and kind of like it's all about the hunt for these designers who are who will make styles of jewelry, but each one then becomes inherently one of a kind depending on like certain stones they sourced for it. So color was a really big trend. One trend that was a little bit newer to me was kind of the resurgence of white gold. So that's something that I didn't include in my recent story. And there's been like chatter about like, when will white gold come back? And I feel like I finally felt it this Vegas. Of course, white gold never went away for a lot of consumers, and particularly a lot of bridal consumers. But now I'm seeing lots of mixed metal pieces and just people mixing their yellow gold designs with white gold designs in terms of the styling. So it felt like there was a return to that with a lot of newer brands, which was really exciting.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's interesting. Lenore, what about you?
Yeah,
Lenore also was the only, Lenore and Lauren actually were the only two among us that made it to the antique show. So you can talk about anything you saw there too.
Yeah, so I'll talk about my time at JCK and then also the antique show. So I spent like 2 days at JCK. I split it between luxury and like the rest of the show floor. Similar to what Ashley said, I did see a lot of color, which is always fun, a lot of interesting gemstones. Definitely, yes, more white metal. And then some more genderless designs, which I thought were really interesting. And then another thing that I had noticed, similar to last year, I saw a lot of like transformable jewels, like your day to night earrings or like a bracelet that flips over and it's a different design. So I thought that was really cool. As far as the education sessions, I noticed there was a lot of interest in JCK Talks, which are the education sessions. A lot of sessions this year, a lot of really great speakers, and they look to be well attended, which is really impressive when you consider how much there is going on during Jewelry Week. So if people are taking the time out of their day to, sit down and go to your session with, all these other things going on, that says a lot. And a lot of the sessions were social media focused, which I thought was interesting. They had a dedicated social stage for those speakers. And then as for the antique show, I mean, that's, by design, you're not really going to see any new trends there per se. But it's always a lot of fun. It's always interesting. And it's fun to see how, the styles cycle like through the years, like whatever style that I see trending at Couture or JCK, someone did that decades ago, and you can find that at the antique show. So that's always fun. I would definitely recommend you all go to the antique show next year. I really enjoyed it.
Very nice. Lauren, do you have anything to share? Any thoughts on color gemstone trends that you saw at the show?
Yeah, I definitely saw a lot of pink and green, which I couldn't tell if it was just me because those are my favorites. But then I went to the Colored Stones update and they confirmed it, that those are both extremely hot colors right now, both in like the traditional precious stones, rubies and emeralds, but also across the spectrum of those unique gemstones that Ashley was talking about, garnet, spinel, tourmaline. And another thing that I saw at Couture was a lot of like gender neutral lines. I hesitate to say unisex, but things that are not specifically feminine or specifically masculine. I saw a lot of that this show too.
Yeah, I think like I'm going to piggyback on that. Ashley, unisex was one of the trends you covered in your trend report. I'm sure you saw that too. I mean, there's just a big movement, not just in jewelry, but in general, and kind of degendering things and just saying like, we make something, a man could wear it, a woman could wear it, it doesn't matter. And also like along those lines, there's obviously much more dedicated men's jewelry. And one that pops out for me, Lauren, you and I went to see Mastaloni, of course, family owned, been around for decades, pearl company, and they released their first men's pearl jewelry collection, which was really interesting to see. Very interesting to see for a company like Mastaloni that's been around for a long time and tends to be more traditional. For me, the topic, I mean, I also saw the white gold trend, which is interesting. I remember when I started in the industry in 2007, it was all white metals, and then it was the recession. So then it was white metals, but it was all silver because gold was too expensive. And then at some point after we got out of the recession, yellow gold came back for fashion jewelry. We even see yellow gold in bridal today. But I would say this is the first time in several years that I've seen designers working in white metals and or mixing, doing more two-tone jewels and mixing white metals with yellow gold, which I really like, incidentally. One topic of interest, I would say, that I know everybody noticed at the shows, I mean, there's just so much discussion about lab grown diamonds. And I think it's kind of like this interesting trajectory with this product. It was 2018 when De Beers introduced Lightbox, its lab grown diamond line at the shows. It really shook up the market. It generated a lot of conversation. It really kind of like, in my mind, opened the door and legitimized the product for more and more people to grow the diamonds, to sell them. I feel like though the energy and the talk about lab grown diamonds this year at the show was around the falling prices and kind of what's going to be the future of this market if there's more and more supply coming online. I mean, there's so many companies now in the lab grown diamond business, and there's more and more supply coming in the market. So what is going to be this future of these stones if prices just keep falling? I mean, at a certain point, the product isn't luxury anymore. If it's just, so inexpensive, it's not a luxury product anymore. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I do think that this is going to be an interesting rest of the year. And we'll talk a little bit about that later for the lab grown diamond market. And I don't think all these companies just growing diamonds and selling this generic lab grown diamond jewelry are going to survive. I think people that have built a brand and have like a legitimate story to tell about their product and have a logo and have a point of view are better positioned than people that are just out here pumping out all these very inexpensive diamonds. But I mean, lab grown diamonds generally was kind of like one of the biggest buzzes at the show. And Lenore, you mentioned the education sessions. I did not make it to this one, but there was a lab grown diamond updates panel. I think it was on, I want to say Saturday morning. And I heard that people were just spilling out of the showcase stage area. Like people were just lined up all around the stage area for that update. So that's interesting. Now I want to talk a little bit about what would you say the mood at the show was this year? I mean, it's definitely been an interesting couple of years, you know, with obviously there were no shoes in 2020, they moved to August in 2021. They were like finally back to their normal time slot last year. So Lenore, I'm going to start with you. What do you think the mood was? Were exhibitors happy? Were buyers happy? Were people feeling like, you know, the good times are going to keep going in jewelry?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the vibes were positive this year. I can talk specifically about the antique show since I was one of the only ones who attended that one. I think having this show co-locate with Couture this year, you know, being able to get in with the same badge, I think that was a huge plus for them. And I definitely had exhibitors share that with me, that they were having a better show this year at the Wynn. Last year, they were at the Las Vegas Convention Center. So if you wanted to go, which I did, you know, I had to block out an entire afternoon, you know, to go over there. That's, you know, time is a luxury in Vegas. Like that's not something everyone is going to be able to do. So yeah, I mean, you know, and traveling over there was a little bit of a pain, and just the ambiance of that convention center was just not what those exhibitors deserve, in my opinion. I mean, they have such beautiful things to show you, and that to me was just not the venue for it. I think it was much better for them to be at the Wynn. And I heard more people at Couture tell me that they were going to pop over to the antique show because, you know, it's right over there. You know, even if you just had an hour to spare. And I think that's great for them. I mean, the antique show felt way busier to me this year than it did last year.
Now I heard, and this is that it was absolutely packed the first day. And that makes sense because it's generally a first day show. Like you want to get in there the first day and see what people have because they're all one of a kind and they're just going to be. So I heard it was packed the first day, but I agree. I think the more things they can kind of put within walking distance of each other, the better.
Agreed. Yeah.
Ashley, any thought about the mood this year?
The mood seemed really good to me in Vegas this year. The buyers I was talked to seemed happy. Exhibitors seemed happy. I didn't get maybe like, because I felt like maybe last year and even in 2021, people would be saying the like best year we've had, kind of that pandemic boom. And people are like, best year we've had. No one said that to me this year, but it seemed really positive. I mean, obviously we can't just like keep going up and up and up. There are like limits to, you know, these cycles, but people seemed really happy. And I know that, you know, for a lot of us, and me included, we're wondering like, will macroeconomic factors kind of affect jewelry? Just the war with Russia, just inflation, all of these things. And that did not seem to be a damper on the people I was speaking to. So I guess it's just, you know, appealing, you know, working with a demographic that has dispensable income, and they're still buying.
Yeah. You know, for me, I feel like I would agree that I think the mood overall was good, but maybe not as good as it was last year or even in the August show in 2021, because those were really like unprecedented times for jewelry. I think it was 2021 when we had absolutely record jewelry sales, if I'm not mistaken. But we're not going to stay on that high forever. And I think people recognize that. one thing I think that's interesting about the shows post-pandemic is that I remember the shows were kind of flagging, like before the pandemic. I think it was 2018, we did a story and the headline was something like, what are the future of jewelry trade shows? And there was all this conversation, like people weren't going to the shows as much and attendance was down. And like, it's hard to like, it's hard to quantify, but like the mood and the energy at the shows wasn't that good. And there was this kind of like, well, we have too many shows, people don't want to go to all these shows, et cetera, et cetera. And why do we need shows? And then I think those couple of years where people couldn't go anywhere and couldn't go to shows at all just made it apparent to people why they actually like going to shows. Like I think the shows have come back stronger post-pandemic than they were before the pandemic, because I think the pandemic showed us what is important about the shows, and it's just the ability to connect in person and also to see jewelry in person. And Ashley can attest to this, and so can Lenore. Doing a jewelry appointment over Zoom does not do it. Like you have to see the product, you have to touch the product, pick it up, try it on. Like that's the joy. I mean, the product's so joyful, and that's the joy of the product, not seeing it on a computer screen. And I think, the trade shows were trade show attendance was sagging there for a while, but I think having to not go for a couple years, like gave everyone a break, first of all, and let people like save up some money, but it also just showed people like why they like going to the shows. And I feel like we're still kind of like riding that wave a little bit, because this to me was the first, I found it really exhausting. And someone was pointing out to me, they're like, well, this is really kind of only the second time you've done this since the pandemic. Like, I used to do this every year. I did this every year for so many years. And then we were off for essentially like 2 years. So it's still kind of like it felt like a little bit of getting back into like, not like it was before, but into the new normal, and thinking like, okay, these are the shows going forward. Like I can do this again. I'm used to it. But
I completely agree with that, Michelle, just about that question isn't really being raised right now. Like, do we need trade shows? Because before, people would be like, I'm doing so much of my business digitally. Like this designer found my store on Instagram. We connected. Now, like I know that they're carried here and here. So like I placed an order, like, like I took this risk, and people are like, with the digital world, like, do we really need all of this? And that question isn't being raised now so much, because I think we all see the value of in person. It's like, these constant discussions about like working from home, working in an office, like people are seeing like the value of like this kind of a hybrid world. And in this hybrid world, like a huge group of events like JCK and Couture, those are our on times where we see things in person, see people in person. And so for me, it didn't feel like new coming back from the pandemic. It just felt like people were happy to be there. If anything, I just think maybe the question of like, should we add like this trade show? Maybe that's more off the table. It's
Right.
more like of an appreciation of the really core business events we have, and like those really being bolstered, because before, people would just try to add trade shows a lot. Like it's funny how much the Vegas schedule even changes, like locations and like adding this and adding that. And if anything, I think just the core events have been somewhat bolstered.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there was a point too where there were too many trade shows.
Yes.
Companies were constantly, oh, we're going to have an extra show here, an extra show there, and now there's a show here, and now there's a show there. And I think people just had it. And we
don't want more shows. Like it's
too
much. No one can see everyone they want to see in general. So I think.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like I said, I feel like it's never going to go back to feeling the way it felt before, but I feel like now I'm getting a sense of what it feels like going forward. And I think like, you're right, these key core events, people are like re-energized to attend in person. Like, it's a really interesting question. It's like, yeah, we could do our entire lives online. You could shop online, you could work at home permanently, you could do all your appointments online. But the question is, do you want to? And I think the answer is no. I mean, at the end of the day, we're social, right? Like we thrive on interaction.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Lauren, did you want to say something?
No, I was going to say the basically the same thing, that in terms of the pandemic being over, which this was only my second year, so I only have it to compare from last year, but I heard a lot of people say that this was kind of the year where they felt like all of the precautions were put in place, where they were like, oh, well, no one ever expected a pandemic to happen, but if it ever happens again, like we feel really prepared. I feel like I heard a lot of people say things like that.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. So now I want to talk about, get into the specifics of the shows. Can everybody tell us what was your favorite piece of jewelry, favorite collection, and or favorite appointment? What was your favorite little like hour you spent at the shows? And Ashley, I'm going to start with you.
For me, it was my appointment at Fernando Giorgi. And it's funny because there wasn't like a new collection, something like revolutionary and new. It was just a continuation of his core silhouettes. And, he'll just mix it up in terms of scale, in terms of the gemstones he's using. But he was in a villa this year. I'm trying to remember if he's typically in a villa or not, because last year I had it abbreviated couture, so I didn't see him at all. But this year he was in a villa, and it was just, he has so much good work. I think a villa is really good for him because it allows like that space to breathe, because each piece is so incredible and it kind of like gives you some room to look at all of it. And I was just really blown away by just experiencing it in person, because it's like the picture is magnificent, the video is magnificent, but there was this one pair of, I'm trying to remember, it's one of his like key shapes, and he uses all pear-shaped stones. They're all going the same direction. And this earring was just a really huge drop, and it was emeralds and then some Paraiba tourmalines, but that were light green, and then down to diamonds. So it was just like this ombre effect, but big stones, perfectly selected stones. I also liked the idea of selecting these Paraiba tourmalines that are the light green, like they're not that classic Paraiba color, like the most desired color. Like I just love when people like embrace different gems, like even when they're not like considered like
for that.
Yeah, exactly, the standard. And they're just so magnificent to look at in person and like see how they move on the ear. So that was like a standout appointment and piece of jewelry for me.
That sounds amazing. Lauren.
So all this talk of color, and actually my favorite appointment that I had was with a debut exhibitor. So they're called 886, the Royal Mint. 886 being the year that they started producing coins for the British monarchy. So they're in London, and last year they launched a jewelry line, which is just so unique. They call it fusing heritage and innovation, and the pieces are classic, timeless, definitely in line with the unisex, gender neutral jewelry. They're weighty. I mean, they just feel luxurious, but just a really interesting company. And they said that they were blown away how welcoming the show was. They wanted to come back, and it was refreshing to hear that they had a good first experience. But also,
sorry, Lauren, this was couture, right?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, they were at couture. But I don't know, no color, just yellow, gold, and silver. But it was just a really interesting company. I enjoyed that.
Okay. Lenore?
Yeah, so one of my favorite appointments was also at Couture. I met with Lord Jewelry. They're a father-daughter duo. They're based out of LA. And they have these really incredible pieces. And they're just two very lovely people, just nice people to speak to. And there was just nothing in the case that I wouldn't have taken home with me. Just really well-made, beautiful jewels, like gorgeous enamel work. They have this butterfly ring in particular with just incredible enamel work that stood out to me. And then another appointment that I would highlight was at the antique show. I met with Windsor Jewelers. They were really lovely, and they showed us all these awesome jewels from so many different eras. And the best part was they knew everything about every single piece, and they had so much knowledge to share with us. And that's always really fun for me. So those were my two.
For me, I would have to say it was meeting with the designers in this next class of the Natural Diamond Council's Emerging Designers Development Initiative. EDDI is the acronym we use. I know so many acronyms in this industry, but that is the program funded by Lorraine Schwartz and the Natural Diamond Council to increase diversity in the jewelry industry and access to diamonds. So some of the designers, this was their first time working with diamonds. I'm actually going to do a write-up on all of them, but I just thought they were so, like, I love their designs. I thought everyone was different, but everybody had, like, all the collections were distinct, but they were all really interesting at the same time, and everybody had their own perspective. And it was, for a lot of them, it was their first trade show, so they were super excited to be there. They had them in a room kind of in a ballroom that was kind of across from luxury at JCK. They kind of had their own space over there. I don't know if anyone else got over to see them, but I really enjoyed meeting all of them, and they're all so nice. And all of them have followed up with me since and said, oh, it was so nice meeting you, and let's stay in touch. And I'm anxious to see what they do, because there was a lot of talent in that room. And I think it's such a great program. Another appointment that I really enjoyed, and Lenore, you just reminded me of this when you mentioned about Windsor Jewelers knowing everything. If anybody went to see Jorge Adler at Couture, he makes all his jewelry in Virginia, and he sources old coins from auctions, and he like sets them in gold rings or pendants, and his jewelry is just beautiful. And he doesn't alter the shape of the coin at all. He kind of like molds the setting naturally to the coin, even if it's like not perfectly round. And he has coins of Athena and all these Greek gods and goddesses and leaders, and he can just tell you the history of every single coin he has in there, like when it was used, who used it, why. He has this amazing, so Athena often in mythology was pictured with an owl on her shoulder, which she was also the goddess of wisdom. So that's how the owl became this kind of symbol of wisdom. There's a little bit of trivia I didn't know that Jorge told me. And he has this one amazing coin. So when they minted a coin with Athena on one side, there was always an owl on the other. And I was talking to him, I was like, well, when you get a coin and you set it in the ring, how do you pick which side to use if they're both really good? And he's like, that's a really good question. He's like, I just kind of have to go with my heart. But he had this one really good owl coin. So Athena was one side, owl was on the other, and he used the owl in the ring. And it was just, it's so good. And I told him to look out for a cat coin for me, but he said in all these years he's been doing this, there have been no cat coins. So, but Jorge Adler, if you get a chance to check out his work, I'd highly recommend it. And he's also just so nice, which I think makes such a difference too for me. So for anyone, we're just a couple more questions and we're gonna jump into the questions we got beforehand. Did anyone have any major surprises at the shows this year? Anything that you were like, it shocked you to see this person or hear about that? Were there any surprises?
Just off the top of my head, we had actually, I think just our team, we discussed a little bit like what were people chatting about in Vegas, and we touched on lab grown diamonds, and the fact that I can't think of any designer at Couture who uses lab growns. And then something that was interesting to me was just hearing about some pushback that people experienced, like from other couture designers about lab growns in their design. So like brands who didn't exhibit but like have some cool things with lab growns, and like certain couture designers being like, oh well, you'll never exhibit at Couture. Like I was surprised at the how heated people felt about it, like even in an arena where kind of design comes first. So that was like a little bit interesting to me, because I mean the whole lab grown conversation doesn't even really come into play there as much, and like Couture, I don't even think really has like education sessions anymore. Like it's not like a focus there. So I found that a little surprising that there would be like these vehement reactions to that. But I mean, I think that's like why we're all staying so tuned into the topic, is because like it remains a hot topic and it's just always something to watch, because ultimately it does like affect everyone in the industry.
Yeah, it's interesting. Lauren, do you want to give any perspectives? I know you probably didn't have any surprises since everything's kind of new for you, but do you want to give your perspective as a first-time editor attendee? And just so everyone knows, Lauren used to work for LJ West, so she was at the shows last year, but from an exhibitor perspective. So this was her first time kind of as an editor, getting our steps in, roaming the halls.
Yeah, there's so much to see. Like in a way, it's such an intimidating environment because there's just so much to look at. And I don't know that it was necessarily surprising, but I guess just from a perspective, it's such a that environment is so conducive to learning. Like I think for the exhibitors, for the attendees, like people who are buying, like even people that have been doing this for a long time, like there's still education talks about brand new technology, about everyone has insights, everyone has opinions, and people love to talk about their work. People love to talk about their designs and the things that they're using. And I don't know that it was surprising, but it was really nice that it was conducive to learning, since, personally, I'm semi-new to the industry, that people were just willing to share things, and whether it was opinions or facts or news, all of that. It was just nice. I feel like I learned so much in the span of like 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things about the industry is actually, I feel like you never stop learning. Like even if you've been in this industry for decades, you can run across a gemstone you never heard of, or see a designer who's like doing a new twist on something, or there's always something, a new topic or a new issue to discuss. And like you always have to be learning. And now, people obviously learning about like, we've kind of finally got adjusted to like Instagram, and now people are learning about like Chat GPT, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I think that's what makes it, for me, that's what keeps the industry fun and interesting, no matter how long you're in it. Like you can still always learn something new. Lenore, before I move on to the final question, any surprises for you?
I mean, this is my third time doing the Vegas shows, so not too many surprises. The only thing that stands out to me was how crowded it seemed to me this year. I was going to an evening event, and it was around the time that the JCK shows were letting out, and I had to unfortunately like go against the tide and try to get into that like little hallway area. And just like the amount of people with their badges that were just pouring out of the hallways was just like, it was really a sight to see. So that the amount of people was a surprise for me, but that's a nice surprise.
Yeah. I think that you kind of, when you came in, and so 2019 was your first show, correct? So I think when you came in, that's when the shows were kind of like in a slowdown and they weren't as crowded. Like this is as crowded, I think, as I've ever seen them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to think back on like, because when I came in was 2007, right? So then like 2008, 2009 were kind of like down years for the economy. So they definitely weren't super crowded then. And then there was like a rebuild. But I think for me, I think this is the most crowded I've seen the shows in the entire time I've been here. So that makes sense. I also had that experience of trying to swim against the current one evening, and it was crazy. So before we open it up for questions, what is your personal outlook for the rest of 2023? I'm going to start with a little tidbit I picked up at Couture. I was going between appointments. I was walking with a retailer. I was like, well, how's business? He's like, well, business is good. He's like, but we're having a problem. Like our slowness is coming at the lower price points. So he said $5,000 and up, like our more expensive pieces, that those price points are selling. He's like, but our lower, our kind of lower price point jewelry is not doing as well. And then I thought it was interesting, Lenore, when you reported on Signet's first quarter results, Jenna Drosis said the same thing, that they saw softness at lower price points. And I think that's kind of a harbinger of things to come. I think that we are going to see a slowdown later in the year. And I think companies like Pandora have kind of been girding themselves against it already. They see it coming too. We're going to see a slowdown coming in the second half of the year that's going to particularly impact the kind of lower end of the market, for lack of a better way to put it. But I think that the big luxury players and luxury goods will continue to do really well, but I think we're going to see a slowdown at the lower price points. So that's my outlook for the rest of 2023. I also don't think, and we've kind of said this already, we're not going to see those record sales again this year. But I think overall, I think the industry will end up having a decent year, perhaps even with last year, maybe down a couple percentage point, maybe up a couple percentage points, but we can, the kind of growth we saw in the sales we saw were not sustainable. And there's no shame in that. Like, we had a couple of great years. I think we're going to see like a kind of a normalizing of spending now, but that's just my outlook. Ashley, thoughts on the rest of the year?
Yeah, these questions are always tough for me. Because I'm definitely someone who, I've covered design, so I'm definitely not so focused on numbers, but it's always interesting to hear people's outlooks. And for me, the general sense I get is still strong. That it will still be a good year for people, but just not at the level of, end of 2020, 2021, or even maybe last year. I think it will pale a little bit, but still be a good year. I think that's the best sense I can get. And and at the same time, like, my expectations, just for the pandemic were so different than how the pandemic turned out. And I know that was a really, really different kind of circumstance, but I always feel like anything could happen in a way.
Yeah.
So I don't know. People, even in the economy in general, just the talk of recession, what is a recession? What's the definition of recession? Are we just changing it? Are we actually in one? It's all so mind-boggling to me that I guess maybe for now jewelry remains a little bit bulletproof to all of this confusion, because it's appealing to a luxury consumer.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna predict a good rest of 2023.
All right. Lauren and Lenora, your predictions for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I would say my view is mixed for the rest of the year, but leaning more towards positive. I think similar to what you and Ashley said, we were kind of spoiled by these like blockbuster pandemic years, and now things are starting to change a bit. I cover retail for National Jeweler, so I'm pretty up to date on most of these things. And I recently covered, like Michelle said, Signet's Q1 results, and it was a struggle for them. They noted these declining sales, particularly lower than expected Mother's Day sales.
Yeah.
And they're chalking it up to a couple of different things, but mainly economic pressures on the consumer. And like Michelle had said, they're seeing good sales in their pieces over $5,000, but in that $1,000 to $5,000 range, particularly in like fashion jewelry, that's where they're seeing lower sales. And they said that continued into their second quarter. And, I know we all came back from seeing these, incredible expensive jewels, but, for your average neighborhood jeweler, that $1,000 to $5,000 range is where a lot of their sales come from. Those diamond studs, a tennis bracelet, an anniversary band, those things are all going to mostly fall within that range. So, there are some jewelers who tend to more well-to-do customers, but inflation gets to everyone eventually at some point. And I think that the middle market is kind of feeling those effects now. And like ultimately Signet lowered its guidance for the year. And, that's not to say that Signet, speaks for the entire industry, but I think
it is a bellwether.
Yeah, it's a good marker, to see where things are going. So, I would just say to be cautiously optimistic. I think that is my outlook for the rest of the year.
I hesitate to make a prediction per se, but I'm really happy to echo some of the things that I heard. I cover colored gemstones in particular for National Jeweler, so that's where I spend a lot of my time talking to people. And I have to echo that I heard the same thing. High price points is where people are still doing well, still succeeding, but also that a lot of these colored gemstones that are seeing price increases that may put them in this higher range that they might not have been in before now. So like increases on colored gemstones from 20 to 60%. But I'll say Kimberly Collins made a comment that she'd had people coming up to her booth going, "Oh my gosh, have you seen the price increases?" And she was like, "Yes." And they were like, "But we're still going to get it because we can still sell it." And so retailers are still selling it even amid the price increases, but the lower end, there was some encouragement of kind of trying to offer these more affordable colored pieces like these garnets and tourmalines that are still beautiful, bright, colorful, but maybe on the lower end of the spectrum. But yeah, a lot of the focus was on the high price point stuff.
Yeah. I think Ashley made a really good point too, that it's like, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's like hard to predict what's around the corner. Like you never know what could happen. And, case in point for us, we all are based in New York City. And when we came back from Vegas, you're just coming back from Vegas, you think like, oh, I'm going to relax, like try to take it easy this week. And then we came back to these wildfires in Canada. And I'm sure a lot of our non-New York attendees saw the pictures online. The skies in New York City were orange and we literally could not go outside for days. And it's like, it's very, I know people in the West Coast are used to dealing with wildfires, but it's not something I'm, as a lifelong East Coaster, I've ever experienced, and kind of falls under the category of like, you never know what's going to happen now. Like you think you're just going to come back from Vegas and it's going to be like any other year. And then we came back to these like sinister orange skies and it was different, and it was a little reminiscent of the pandemic. You had to wear a mask when you went out. They recommended people mainly stay home if they could. So, and that might not be the last time this summer we're dealing with that. So, and that's climate change, and these kind of events are going to be factors going forward. So Ashley's right. Like you can just never tell what's going to happen anymore. So thank you all so much. I am going to, that was a great discussion. As a reminder for our attendees, if you want to ask a question, you can still type it into the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to kick off the Q&A with questions that were submitted beforehand. We had a ton of them. The first one I'm going to throw to Lenore. Lenore, someone wants to know, what were the hot trends in jewelry and technology?
Yeah, so we touched on this a little bit earlier. I would say retail tech-wise, ChatGPT is still the topic of the moment. JCK Talks had some ChatGPT sessions. I know Larissa Werstiak of Joya Marketing, she did one. And if I'm not mistaken, her session is available on YouTube now if you were not able to see it. And then Jennifer Shaheen of Technology Therapy Group, she had this really interesting session on AI in retail. I think retailers, jewelers specifically, are learning more about ChatGPT now just because of all the buzz about it. And they're learning its capabilities and what it can do, whether that's creating product descriptions for your website, like generating social media captions for you, work that maybe you're not able to get to or you don't have a dedicated team to work on for you. So I just think as jewelers, retailers, whoever, learn more about it and its capabilities and what it can do, it's only going to get more popular. So yeah, I would say ChatGPT is the tech topic of the moment in retail.
Yeah, and I'm going to share here, Lenore, you wrote a story that they had a session at AGS Conclave in Kentucky back in April on ChatGPT that you covered. So that was really good too. Yeah, it definitely has some uses, and it's something I hear a lot of designers and retailers are looking at. Someone also want to know, and I will take this question, which booth from the Diamond Pavilion did we love? I don't know if anyone else has any opinions. I don't know if people are going to like this answer, but I thought Lightbox, which is De Beers lab-grown diamond brand, had an absolutely incredible booth. Like, I don't know if they saw it, but it looked like a little glass box. It stood out from the other booths. They had this holograph of a slot machine on the wall, and you could pull the lever and it like played a slot for you. And if you won, they pull it again and get until you won, which was much better than the casino. But if they pulled the lever and you won, they had like little prizes in the booth, and they had their jewelry in there, and then a lot of information about how they grow their diamonds. I'm sure everybody knows, in Gresham, Oregon, right outside of Portland. And I just thought, like, it was a booth that really spoke to the brand. That brand is fresh and it's modern and it's clean and it's about technology. And the booth really looked like that. what other booths from the Diamond Pavilion did I love? Like, to be honest, unless I missed them, I kind of felt like all the Diamond booths otherwise kind of look the same. Like there was one I did not walk past that was amazing. I didn't feel like any of them stuck out to me except the Lightbox booth, which obviously it's De Beers own, it's a different kind of product, but I thought that was really cool. And then someone else wanted to know, what are some suggestions you would have for a first generation jeweler looking to get more behind the scenes in the industry? I think this is a great question for this panel because my answer is go to things, go to shows, go to education sessions at shows, get involved. If there's a local Women's Jewelry Association chapter where you are, get involved. If your store's an American Gem Society jeweler, you can get involved in that. You can go to Conclave. You know, any kind of industry organization you can join, even if it's online, join it. I mean, I think that's the best way to meet people. And I think that's the best way to get a better picture of the industry, is just to get involved in things. Jewelers for Children, I mean, there's a million things you can get involved in. And then we have 2 questions about trends that I'm going to throw to Ashley. Ashley, someone wants to know, I'm wondering if the editors saw more whimsical pieces this year than in previous years, which is an interesting question.
I wouldn't say so. I would say on par with other years. I think that there is, like, just the fact that there are so many brands today. I think that there's more jewelry, more design to see than ever, and more voices represented. But, you know, equally strong to the whimsical, you know, more imaginative, I guess, designs are people who really specialize in making like an incredible chain that's like a great investment piece for a consumer. And like so many different stores are going to tell you that someone like Anita Ko is their best seller, who just, you know, got on the map from doing these really pretty wearable diamond basics that are like a little more fashion forward, a little more fun than just a plain diamond stud. So I wouldn't say more than other years. No, but today in this climate, I think we see a lot more whimsical jewelry than you would have seen 20 years ago. Yes.
But not specifically more this year than there was last year.
No.
Okay. Second question for you. We had 2. Can you talk a little bit about trends in bridal? We had a couple questions about that beforehand.
Yeah. So for bridal, I didn't see a lot of bridal specific brands this time, but overall, what I'm seeing is just a lot more metal in the designs. So a little bit backing away from that super minimal band to have more metal, or to have like a little bit more interesting configuration of stones, whether like a little cluster or side stones. So just getting away from a really plain solitaire. And also it's funny because when it comes to fine jewelry in general, yellow gold has been so dominant that it's really invaded the bridal market as well. So, and you know, bridal, of course, is way less trendy than the rest of fine jewelry. So even though white metal is kind of like creeping back into jewelry trends in general, I actually think because of the way bridal moves, like yellow gold is sort of still a really big trend. And I've just really kind of seen it as the norm for like, especially among like Gen Z and millennial brides, just a lot of yellow gold. But yeah, metal, more interesting stones, and yellow gold, I think, are the biggest. And really like no rose gold in bridal right now. I feel like that's just like
no
really
rose gold anywhere, really, when now that I'm thinking about it. Because I feel like for a while everyone was like, I made this collection in yellow and rose. And this
yeah.
show, I can only think of maybe one appointment where somebody had something in rose gold.
Yeah, same here. It's like specific designers who like really, who is, you know, a certain maybe alloy they've made of rose gold like really resonates with them. But no, I feel like rose gold isn't really trending.
What about halos? That was a huge thing for a long time, and we always get questions about that. Diamond halos or even colored gemstone halos for engagement rings.
I feel like right now is about the hidden halo. So those details under, but the moment of the big halo is definitely declining. I think us for the classic bride, she is preferring a solitaire style ring to that currently.
Yeah, for sure. Lenore, I know you had a couple bridal appointments. Did you want to ask any or add anything?
Yeah, so I went to see Corey and I went to see Kirk Cara as well. And everything Ashley is saying is absolutely what I saw. No, none of those big halos, a lot of those underneath details, especially at Corey. I saw some colored gemstones like in the side stones, which I think is a pretty idea. But yeah, definitely no halos. I did not see any rose gold. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, we're coming to time here, so I'm just gonna wrap up with one last question, and this is kind of a general advice question we got in beforehand. As a new jeweler, should I look to attend the Vegas shows next year? And if so, with what focus should I have in mind when attending? Now, when I read this question, I think this person is a jewelry store owner asking, like, should I attend as an attendee, walking around looking at jewelry? That's how I take this question. So they want to know, should they attend and what focus should they have when attending? My advice would be yes. I think if you're new, as Lauren pointed out, it's great to attend, not just because you want to be there or you want to find vendors, but because there's just so much to learn and so many people to meet. And if you're new, I think the business is still, I mean, even though it's the year 2023, this business is still about relationships and like relationships with stone vendors, relationships with diamond dealers. So I think if you're a new jeweler, yeah, you have to come and make relationships. You can't do it all online. And they want to know, what focus should I have in mind with attending? I think that's really would depend on what kind of store you have. I would say the biggest advice I can give you is be prepared and do your homework beforehand. Like the way we do it, and this is editor way, not necessarily retailer way. I say, I'm going to do this day at Couture, this day at JCK, this day at Couture, this day at JCK. I don't tend to make appointments at both shows and run back and forth between the two. It's too time consuming. So if Friday is the day I'm JCK, then I'm JCK all day. And I don't go back to the Wynn until it's time to be done for the evening. So I think that you have to figure out who you want to see, if it's worth attending Couture and JCK for you. If not, pick one. And then I think you just have to be very organized and you have to do your homework beforehand. You have to figure out who you want to see, where they are, and when you want to see them. That's I just think the shows are big. You just have to be, even if you're not an organized person, you have to learn to be for these shows, or it's just not going to be very productive. So anyone else, any other advice for a new jeweler attending the show next year?
Yeah, I would agree. I think time management is definitely key. I mean, there's so much to do. There's so much to see that if you don't have even like some idea of what your schedule is, you're just going to be completely lost. I would also recommend making appointments when you can. I mean, most people are, again, very kind, very welcoming. They're happy to talk to you, happy to show you things. But for me personally, I always like to let them know I'm coming if I know in advance, and then they have, dedicated time set aside for me. They have someone who can come and, talk to me and walk me through things. So my two big things would be time management, make yourself a little schedule, and then make appointments if you can.
Yeah. Ashley or Lauren, any advice? Lauren, let me ask you this. What would you do differently if you had it to do over again as a first? More shoes?
Definitely more comfortable shoes for sure. But I think along with what Lenore was saying, I think I would make more appointments next year, not because I was upset that I did it this year. This year I wanted the flexibility to walk every hall and kind of have that extra time leisure to look at things and cover as many square inches of the show as I could. But there were times where if I did have a question, like it is the show and people are welcoming, but people are busy. They're doing business. And a lot of these people have had these appointments made for months before the show. And so, yeah, I mean, if there is someone that the person who asked the question really wants to see, it's a very good idea to make an appointment. Because people could just be busy and you could always go back, but it's better safe than sorry, I think.
I would just add that if you're a brand, I would contact the shows, see if you can get a tour. Like if you are thinking about, should I exhibit in the future, see if you can get a tour at each show does it differently. Some are more open than others, but that's how I would handle it. And I would really recommend attending, because whether you're a brand or you're a store, as small business owners, you can rely on each other so much. Like stores that I think that old school attitude of like, or no, it still exists with like big stores where, they really don't interact. That exists. But like all of the new up and coming stores, like the store owners are really good friends and they help each other. And, that knowledge, like just of like how people's sales are going, like and just everything, like that's how you can kind of navigate things together. And then same with designers, like, there are still people who are very competitive, but also a lot of younger brands, just meaning the age of the brand, not the designer, are like, giving each other advice. Like I've even seen people like collaborate together on certain like special edition pieces and like little collections. So I do think that the networking is really invaluable, because probably anyone who's nice and open to that has had somebody be kind to them and someone help them, and so they kind of feel like the need to pay it forward. So I do think it's really valuable to go, and if you go on time and it's not for you, that's still valuable information, but better to go find out.
Right. Like now, oh, this isn't for me. It wasn't worth the time or money. This isn't how I want to do my business. Well, Ashley, Lenore, Lauren, thank you so much. It was a great discussion today, and thanks for your time and for working so hard at the shows. We all had a great time this year. And thanks to everyone here who tuned in today. As I mentioned, this is being recorded as well, and it will be available this Friday, the 16th, on the National Jeweler website. My next question will return on Tuesday, June 27th at 2 p.m. Eastern. This will be an episode featuring Jewelers of America President and CEO David Bonaparte, our Director of Public Affairs and Education, Susan Posnock, and Lenore will also be on this webinar. The title is Take Action to Protect Your Business. And David, Susan, and Lenore are going to be in conversation about the legislative issues facing jewelers today. And they're also going to be talking about JA's annual trip to Washington, D.C. to meet with lawmakers, where they talk about legislation that could potentially impact the jewelry industry. There's more than you realize. I think this will be a really good session to tune into. And you can sign up at nationaljeweler.com/webinar. So you can find more information and register there. After the June 27th episode, my next question is going to be taking a summer hiatus, but we will return in September with all new guests and all new topics. Until then, thank you so much and have a great summer, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.